Welcome to this special edition of 2-Minute Photoshop, where we're going to take an extended look at Photoshop for iPad, introducing all the main features. We'll start with a photograph of this curious animal called a moon rat and see how to mask the background to make a cutout. We'll add our own desert background, remove the sky, and then tint that background to turn it into the surface of the moon, adding stars to complete the effect. We'll see how we can colour the moon rat to match its new environment, adding shading to place it firmly on that lunar surface. We'll make a helmet by drawing a circle and remove the visor area before tinting the helmet and adding colour to it. We'll add a visor with lights, make the inside of the helmet, and then add a globe and a NASA logo before brightening the whole image. In creating this montage, we'll introduce all of Photoshop's image editing tools. We'll see how Photoshop uses layers and layer masks, and we'll explore the different adjustment layers that allow you to non-destructively change the appearance of a single layer or an entire document. We're going to start by opening an image, and we can do that with a panel at the top. We tap on Import and Open, and we can choose to open from our camera roll, from the files on our iPad, or we could take a new photograph with the iPad camera. I've got a photograph that I took in a museum of anthropology with my iPhone, so that'll be in my camera roll. We'll scroll down to an album I've made for Photoshop, and we'll tap to open the image. Now that we've opened our moon rat, we want to cut out that background. We can go onto the Lasso tool. If we tap and hold on the Lasso icon in the toolbar, we get these options. Let's go for Select Subject and see if that manages to select the rat. It takes a couple of seconds, but as you can see, it's done a very good job of cutting it out from the background. There's a few mistakes. Underneath the front foot, there's a bit of reflection that's part of the selection that shouldn't be, so let's fix that. We'll pinch to zoom in, and we can zoom in as far as we like. And now we can go back to the Lasso tool, which it's gone back to by default. We want to subtract this area, so rather than adding to it, which is what the top icon shows, tap the second icon, which will subtract the new selection from the old one. We can easily now trace around the moon rat's foot and then loop around the area we don't want. When we let go, that's now removed from our selection. We could also remove this area between the toes in exactly the same way. When we have a look at the other end of the rat, we can see that the string holding the tail is the same colour as the wall behind, and so part of that has been missed out of the selection. We want to take off the little bit at the back, so with the tool still set to remove from our selection, we can just draw over that, loop around, and that's gone. Now let's change to adding to our selection, and we can add in that bit on the left, and we can loop around the back of the tail to add that to our selection. Now that we've selected the moon rat, we need to get rid of that background. Rather than deleting it, it's always a good idea to add a layer mask to the layer instead, and we can do that by tapping the layer mask icon on the right. And now everything that wasn't part of the original selection has been masked. We can see the mask in two ways. If we tap the top layer icon, it'll show us the mask, and we can slide left to see the original layer and to work on it. Or we can put that away and look at the full layer view, and now we can see the mask next to the layer. Now the thing about layer masks is they hide part of a layer without deleting it. and this means we can edit it later. I can see a small portion under the tail that shouldn't have been part of the selection but was. We can get rid of that by painting it out. Let's switch to the brush tool, and we can change the size of the brush by tapping on the number that's shown, and a circle appears to show the brush size. As we drag down on the slider, it makes it smaller. We also want a hard-edged brush, so tap on the bottom icon and we can drag up to make it a fully 100% hard brush. The foreground colour is black, as we can see at the bottom of the toolbar, and when we now paint over this area, wherever you paint in black, you hide the layer. Let's move around the image. There's a piece of background showing up under the leg. We can paint that out in the same way. Now we've taken out a bit too much of the tail here. We can swap over between black and white by dragging down on the icon at the bottom of the panel. And that swaps the foreground and background colours. Now we can paint over it, and when we paint in white, we reveal the layer again. There's a tiny bit of background showing between the feet, so we can do the same process. We'll paint in black to remove it. Switch from black to white again by swiping down on the icon, and now we can paint it back in again. And the ability to zoom right in means it's possible to create very precise edits to your document. There is a quicker way of using this tool. If we're painting in black, to take out this bit of background that's shown up and we go too far, we can hold the little white circle down at the bottom that modifies the tool. That changes to the eraser. As long as we press that white circle with our other hand, we are erasing the layer mask in this area. So we can release the circle to paint in black to hide the layer, and then hold that button to reveal it again. We'll return to the Move tool and double tap to fit it in the window. At any time you can hide the layer mask by tapping the layer mask icon, and that reveals the full layer behind it. To reveal the mask again, just tap the icon once more. Let's now add a background. To do this, we tap the picture icon towards the bottom of the toolbar. And we can choose to open an image from the camera roll, from the files on our iPad, from the CC libraries, or we can take a picture with the camera. Let's go to the camera roll. And once again, I'll scroll down to my Photoshop album. And we need a picture of the surface of the moon. Now I haven't got a picture of the surface of the moon, but I have got a picture that I took in Lanzarote of a volcanic area that looks similar enough to the lunar surface. So let's tap on that to open it. And there's our image placed directly onto our artwork. Let's pinch to zoom out, and we can scale it by dragging the corner handles until it fills the whole of the image area. And we can tap the Done button to apply the transformation. We can tap again on the picture icon to put its dialogue away. Because we added this image after the moonrat image, it'll come out on top of the moonrat layer. We can fix this by opening our Layers panel, and we can tap and hold on the thumbnail for this layer and drag it down below the moonrat layer. Let's switch to the Move tool and double tap the image to bring it up to fit in the window. We need a selection tool to get rid of the sky. So we'll tap and hold on the Lasso icon, and we'll tap on the second icon, the Quick Selection tool. We simply drag this over the sky, and it selects all pixels of a similar colour. So it's managed to select that whole sky quite easily, because there's a clear delineation between the colour of the sky and the colour of the mountains. We could simply delete this from the image, but once again, it's always better to use a layer mask instead. If we now tap the layer mask icon, it creates a mask that hides everything except the sky. And that's because Photoshop assumes that the selected area is the area you want to keep. In this case, it's the area we want to hide on the mask. So let's undo that step by tapping the icon in the toolbar. And now we want to invert this selection, so everything except the sky is selected. And we do that by tapping the invert button, which appears at the bottom when the quick selection tool is active. And now the marching ants show that everything except the sky is selected. When we now tap the layer mask icon, that sky is now duly hidden on the mask. Let's now add an image of some stars behind our landscape. Once again, we'll click the picture icon, and this time I want to add a file from my CC library. I'll tap the libraries, and now I'll scroll down to my Photoshop iPad folder, and in here I can choose the stars image that I saved earlier from Photoshop on the desktop. And it's warning me that at the moment, Photoshop for iPad can't place images with multiple layers. Well, this is a Photoshop file with just a single layer, so I'll tap OK, place it flattened, it'll be the same thing anyway. And it's placed into our artwork. Because the currently selected layer is the lunar surface, it appears above that and behind the moonrat. Once again, we'll scale it up so that it fills the whole space, and we can tap Done to apply the transformation and finish placing the image. We need to move it behind our lunar surface, so let's put away the CC Libraries panel, open our Layers panel, and now we can pick it up and drag it behind the lunar surface layer. The stars look fine, but now the lunar surface is clearly completely the wrong colour. To adjust the colour of the lunar surface, we first need to switch to that layer. So we'll open our Compact Layers panel, tap on the thumbnail for that layer, and now we can put the Layers panel away. From the three dots at the bottom of the tools on the right, we can open the Layer Actions panel. In Photoshop for iPad, all adjustments are applied as adjustment layers, which means you can change your mind later and change their settings. We'll tap Add Clipped Adjustment, which means the adjustment layer will only apply to the layer beneath. We'll choose the Levels adjustment, and we see a Levels dialog similar to that we've seen in the desktop version of Photoshop. Let's begin by fixing the colour. We'll switch to the red channel by tapping the icon. Let's take some of the red out of this image by grabbing the left-hand button under the histogram and sliding it to the right. We now need to take some of the green out of it, so we'll tap on the green channel, and we'll remove a similar amount of green from this image. We could do with a bit more blue in here to match the blue in the stars, so let's go to the blue channel. This time we'll grab the bright point and move that to the left. And that's a much better match for the stars. It's still a bit too bright on the highlights, so let's go back to our RGB composite channel and now darken the whole thing slightly. And that now matches our background well. If we put our Properties panel away by tapping the icon, there's our image with the lunar surface now a much better match for that starry background. Our moonrat now looks completely wrong in this surroundings. And there are two main problems. One is it's the wrong colour, and the other problem is that the light in this image is coming from the right. You can see that by the light on the lunar surface. But our moonrat is lit from the left. Let's fix that first. We'll open up the compact layer view, switch to the moonrat layer, and now we can go into our transform controls by clicking the icon in the toolbar, and let's tap the icon top right to flip it horizontally. And now we'll tap done. Now for the colour. We could simply duplicate the levels adjustment we'd applied to the background, but here's another way. Let's tap the three dots at the bottom of the toolbar on the right, and let's add another clipped adjustment. And this time we'll choose the hue and saturation adjustment. Now you'll notice we've still got the compact layer thumbnails on top of our image, and that's because panels don't automatically close when you select another panel. So we'll tap to put that view away. Let's drag the hue slider over to the right, and now that is a better colour for our background. But the effect is a little too strong. So in the blending options section, we can tap on the opacity slider and reduce that a little way to around about 80%, and now we've tinted the rat without completely swamping it with that colour. Let's put this panel away. The moonrat is now the right colour for this image, but it doesn't look like it's sitting on the moon's surface, and that's because there's no shadow beneath it. So let's add one. We'll open our compact layer panel, and we'll go down below the moonrat to the adjustment layer above the lunar surface. Let's now add a new layer by tapping the icon. And you can see the empty layer icon appearing above those background layers. We'll put these panels away. We want to pick a colour out of the background, so let's switch to the eyedropper tool, drag it over the image, and as we drag, you can see the foreground colour changing. And we'll choose a dark blue. Now let's switch to the brush tool by tapping the icon. And here we want to use quite a large brush, so we'll tap on the size and increase it. And we also want a soft-edged brush, so we'll tap on the icon for the brush hardness, drag that all the way down to the bottom to get a soft-edged brush. If we paint now, you can see that it's painting a solid shadow. And that's clearly much too dark. So let's undo that by tapping the icon at the top. And instead, we're going to reduce the opacity of this brush. We'll type the icon in the toolbar, and we'll drag down to roughly 30%. And now when we paint on the image, you can see it's painting a low opacity shadow. And we can use this to build up the shadow by going over the same location a few times. Let's add a bit of shadow behind the rat as well. And there's our shadow in place. We can compare with and without the shadow by tapping the eye icon to hide this layer. There it is without the shadow. Tap it again, and there's the shadow in place. We could also do with a bit more shading on the moonrat itself. So let's open the panel, switch to the adjustment layer above the moonrat, and now add another new layer by tapping the icon. We only want what we paint on here to show up where it overlaps the moonrat, So we want to make a clipping mask of this with the adjustment layer and the moon rat below it. So we'll tap the clipping mask icon, and now the little arrow next to the new layer icon shows that it's clipped to the moon rat along with the adjustment layer. We want to sample a brighter colour, and here's a shortcut we can use. Rather than switching to the eyedropper tool, if we press and hold on the shortcut button, we can slide it to get the secondary shortcut, and that gives us the eyedropper temporarily. We can now move this to pick a brighter colour out of these hills, and when we release the shortcut button, we're back to the brush tool. And now we can use the brush to paint over the back of the rat. It looks much too bright, and that's because we're simply painting on the rat with the new colour. To darken it, we need to change the mode of this layer. We can do that by opening the layer properties, and we can change the mode of this layer from normal to hard light, and then that will darken and strengthen the layer underneath. Let's put both of these panels away. And now we can continue to paint on here to build up that shadow. And there's the shadow in place. Let's give him a helmet. We'll open our Compact Layers panel, make sure we're right at the top, and now we'll add a new empty layer. And we can put the panel away. From our selection tools, we can choose the elliptical marquee. And we want to draw a circle. We tap and hold and start to trace, and we get an ellipse. If we hold down the small white circle on the left, that constrains the ellipse to a perfect circle. It's slightly too high, so we want to move it. If we look at the buttons at the bottom, we can tap the More icon, and we can choose Transform Selection. This allows us to move our selection around, and we can scale it down slightly. That's about the right location. Let's tap Done. We'll fill the selection with white. We'll first of all swipe down on the foreground and background colour to swap them over. And now we'll go for the Paint Bucket tool and tap it within that area. That fills the whole space with white. Let's deselect. Just so we can see what we're doing, let's temporarily reduce the opacity of this helmet. We'll open up our properties and bring the opacity down to around 50% and put the panel away. We want to make space for a visor, and this is where we can combine our selections. We'll go back to our elliptical marquee. We'll start drawing down to the bottom right hand corner and drag our marquee up to make the front of our visor. We want to take off the top and the bottom of the visor, so let's change the way this behaves by making the new selection subtract from the old one, and we can do that by tapping the icon. Now we can draw a new ellipse at the top, and when we let go, it's removed that section from the original selection. We want a similar curve at the bottom, and the way to do that is to use the bottom of the selection options, and this produces an intersection between the old selection and the new one. So if we again draw an ellipse from the top, we'll bring it down just below the moonrat's snout, and now when we let go, it intersects the new selection with the old one, and that produces the area that we want. Rather than deleting it, we want to add a layer mask here. Once again, let's invert the selection first. And now when we add the mask, the area we'd previously selected is removed from the helmet. Let's now bring the helmet back to full strength. We could do with adding some shading to this helmet. So let's make another new layer by tapping the icon. And once again, we'll make this layer clipped with our helmet by tapping the clipping mask icon. We'll switch to the brush tool. Let's reduce the opacity of this brush still further and change the foreground colour to black. Because we're painting at a very low opacity, we can take our time and build up the shading on this helmet to give it a slightly rounded effect and stop it looking quite so flat. Let's add a little underneath the top of the visor there as well. Let's add some colour to it. We'll first make sure it's selected. Here we've got the shading above the helmet selected. So let's open the menu and add a clipped adjustment. And we'll choose Hue and Saturation. We'll move this out of the way and enlarge it so we can see it better. Rather than just tinting the helmet, we want to colorize it, so tap the Colorize button. Now we can reduce the lightness and drag the hue slider all the way over to the left. We'll take the lightness down a little more and increase the saturation slightly, and that's the colour that I want. Let's now put some glass in that visor. We'll open our layers and let's select the helmet layer. From the menu at the bottom on the right, we can now select Load as Selection. And when we do this, you can see it's loaded the entire layer and not just the area of the visible helmet. And that's because we hid the visor area on a layer mask. The helmet itself is still a perfect circle. Let's now tap on the layer just below the helmet and make another new layer. We still have our brush set at a low opacity, so let's swap the foreground and background colours, so we're painting in white. And now we can fill all of this area by painting over it with our low opacity white. We can keep on going and add some more white at the edges so we get a good shine on the edge of this visor. And that looks much better. We'll deselect. Let's now add a few lights inside the visor. Back to our brush tool, we'll tap on the size and reduce this, and we'll tap on the opacity and bring this right up to the top. Now we can just tap to add our row of lights and let's add these all the way around the inside of that visor. Finally, we want to draw the inside of the helmet. So let's go down one layer, make another new layer, and make another elliptical selection. When we want to fill this with a darkish red. So let's go to our eyedropper tool, select a dark red from the edge of the helmet. Now we can go to our paint bucket, tap it inside our selection area, and there is the interior of the helmet. We'll deselect. Now obviously this has come out in front of the moon rat and we want it behind. So we can just pick it up, drag it down behind the moon rat, and now there is the interior of the helmet in a much better place. Here's our image so far. Let's open up the full layers panel, and we can see we've got a lot of layers, and it's getting difficult to navigate them and to know what's what. So let's make groups out of them. We'll select the top one, and by tapping the 3 dots at the bottom we get the menu, and now we can choose Begin Multi-Select mode. When we now tap, we can add to this selection, and there are all the layers for the helmet selected. So we'll now tap the folder icon, and that makes a new group from these layers. Let's give it a name. We'll double tap the name and call it Helmet. And now let's tap the Rename button. There's a shortcut for entering multi-select mode. If we select the rat layer, we can hold down the modifier circle bottom left, and now we can tap the tinting layer and the shading layer above it. When we release the modifier button, they're still selected. Once again we can tap the folder icon to make a new group. We can double tap the name of the group and rename this Moonrat, and tap the Rename button. Now we haven't actually merged all these layers. You can see there's a tiny triangle to the left of the group. If you tap that triangle, it'll open the group so you can see the contents. Being able to turn all these layers into a group has an additional benefit, and that's that we can move all these layers together. We'll select the helmet group, let's move it over, and with the Move tool we can now pick it up and we can move it so it's better placed on top of that moonrat's head. Because the interior was not part of the group, we have to move that independently. And let's double tap this layer's name and call it Helmet Interior. And now we're much better fixed to see what's going on. Underneath the helmet interior, this layer is actually the shadow beneath the moonrat. Let's put that in the moonrat group. We'll open the group and pick it up and drag it, and now it is part of that group. There seems to be a small bug here. The moonrat group has renamed itself to Group 1. Let's change it back to Moonrat. And it appears that Photoshop for iPad doesn't like the letter N. Again, that's a small bug. It's not that serious. Let's add a couple more elements to this montage. We'll start off by adding the NASA logo. We'll tap the picture icon, and I happen to have this in my libraries. We'll choose the Photoshop iPad library, and there's the logo. To make it fit onto the rat, we'll move it over to the side, rotate it, and scale it disproportionately to make it a bit wider. So that it gives the impression of rolling over the back of the rat, let's add a slight perspective transformation to this. And we can do this by dragging one of the bottom corner handles. We'll move it across, go back to the transform icon, and now we can rotate it a little bit more and place it. Now as it stands, it's just sitting on top of the rat and doesn't look like it belongs there. So let's change the mode of this layer using the Properties panel. If we change the mode of this layer from Normal to soft light, then we can still see the rat's fur through it, but it looks much more like it's printed on the back. In our Layers panel, let's now drag that and put it inside the Moonrat group. Let's add a globe at the back. We'll tap the picture icon again, and back to our Photoshop for iPad, and here's the Earth. To get rid of all the black, we can use the quick selection tool, drag it in the black all around the globe, invert the selection, and now add a layer mask. Let's move our globe right to the bottom above the stars, and now we can go back into transform mode, make it smaller, and tuck it down behind those lunar mountains. Again, the light is coming from the right in this picture, so let's add a new layer and make a clipping mask of this layer with the Earth. We'll go to our brush, swap the foreground and background colours so we're painting in black. We want a low opacity and a large brush size. And now we can paint some shading over the Earth so it's now lit from the right along with the rest of the moon. Our image is now just about finished, but it all looks rather dark. Let's see if we can brighten it up a little. We'll open our layers, and you can see that in the compact view the groups are now clearly marked. If you tap on a group, it selects it. If you double tap it, then it opens the contents of that group. Let's go back. I want to add an adjustment layer here, so I'll tap and hold on the new layer icon, and I want to add a new adjustment layer. And this is a shortcut for adding that layer. And I'm going to choose brightness and contrast. Let's put the layers away, and I'm going to increase the brightness slightly and add a little bit more contrast to it. And I think that makes a stronger image. If we go back to our layers, you can see because the helmet group was selected, it actually put that inside the group. I'll pick it up and drag it right to the top, and it affects all of the layers in the document because it's not part of a clipping mask with any single layer. Now, although this works well for most of the image, the helmet and certainly the interior of the helmet are much too bright. But we can fix that, because every time you add an adjustment layer, it comes with a layer mask. So let's go onto our original helmet layer and load that as a selection using the menu. We can now select the mask for our brightness and contrast layer, and we can use the paint bucket tool to fill that with black. And when we paint in black on the mask, it hides the layer, just as with any regular layer. And you can see on the icon the little black dot where the mask appears. Let's deselect and hide those layers. So if we hide this layer, here's the original image, rather dark, and here it is with the brightness and contrast adjustment, but with the helmet area removed from that adjustment. Now, I've just spotted a small error that's been there right from the beginning, and that's that on the tail of the mouse there's still the piece of string that was holding it down in the display case when I originally photographed it. We can fix that. We'll open our Layers panel and go to the mouse layer. And now let's choose the Heal tool. We'll make the size a little bit larger. And all we have to do is to trace this over that offending area, and it paints a dark grey. When we take our finger or Apple Pencil off the screen, then it seamlessly patches it with texture sampled from nearby. Now our image is complete, we need to be able to share it with others. And we can do this by tapping the Export button at the top right. If we tap Quick Export, then it's going to flatten it to make a JPEG format. We can now choose to send it via AirDrop to a nearby Mac, via messages, via mail and so on. Or we can save the image to our camera roll, we can print it, and so on. If we want more options, we'll put this dialog away, and when we tap the Export button, we can now choose Publish and Export. And here's the full range of formats. JPEG is the default because it's the most likely one that you want to choose. And you can choose the quality you want. I normally choose a quality of 10 for better results. We can also export it as a PSD, a regular Photoshop document, as a TIFF file, or we could export it as a PNG file. But this format is really only used for smaller graphics that have transparency. You wouldn't want to export a large image with a background like this as a PNG file, because that would simply be a waste of space. We'll go for JPEG, tap Export, and once again you can choose where you want to save it. And that concludes this introduction to Photoshop for iPad. If you want more tutorials on the desktop version of Photoshop, you'll find over 100 2-minute Photoshop tutorials on 2minutephotoshop.com. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to this channel.